We're going to talk about emotional availability. Okay. Emotional availability isn't just about being present for somebody. We a lot of times confuse presence with availability. Just because somebody's in the same room as you, hell, they could be sitting right next to you. You may not feel close to that person regardless of the proximity to you. And so when we talk about emotional availability, there's some things that play into it that we're going to have to talk about. And it's not just being able to be emotional. That's not it either. There's a difference between being emotional and being emotionally available. We talk about this concept of being able to meet someone's emotions. Okay. That doesn't mean that we are emotional with them. It means that we know what emotion that they are giving off and we know the appropriate emotion to be able to respond back with. So even if somebody can name emotions, if I don't know which emotion to reflect back to this person, I don't have any empathy. So when we look at it, the ability for someone to be present and emotionally available requires us to have empathy. Empathy is the ability to spot the emotion in the other person and then know what the appropriate response is to say, I understand where you're at. I can see how that hurts. I can see what that feels like from your perspective. Right. So, a couple things when we get into, we're going to talk about what emotional availability is first, but then we're going to talk about what it looks like to spot someone that does not have emotional availability, what it looks like to spot someone that does have emotional availability, and we'll also be talking about how to grow our own emotional availability. The interesting part is whenever I have conversations about emotional unavailability or availability in general, I'll describe what it takes to be emotionally available to somebody that says, oh, my partner wasn't. And then they realize they actually were not being emotionally available to their partner more often than not. And this causes a lot of disconnects in a relationship because being emotionally available means you're going to have to be able to sit with discomfort and with uncomfortable feelings and be able to express what you are feeling back to somebody without your feelings stepping on theirs. So emotional availability does not have to do with just being present and being able to be emotional, right? We often we confuse proximity with intimacy, right? Emotional availability isn't about how much time someone gives you, it's how they tune in, how present are they. Everyone here can say we've had a conversation with somebody and they seem like they're in a different place, right? That's what emotional unavailability looks like. You have a conversation with them and they're on their phone or they're having a conversation and they can't even reflect back what you just said to them because their mind is somewhere else. But it's not just about that. There's much more to it, right? So physical presence is they show up, and emotional availability is how they tune in. When we tune into somebody, we're understanding what their emotions are. How many of us have been in a relationship where like we're having a bad day and we're not necessarily saying it directly to our partner, but there's signs that are there that we're just having a bad day, we're very quiet, and they act as if nothing's going on, right? They don't even know that we're hurting over something that's going on. And it's not to say that we should do that, we should test them to see if they're going to be that way, but a lot of times we end up with a lot on our plate. Our partner, we go home to him like, how's your day going? You're like, I'm okay. We've got too much in our brain to even dump on them to tell them what's going on, but they don't even start like, oh, okay. And they move on with their day. That's somebody that's not emotionally available because they're not tuning into your emotions and saying, okay, something's up here. I need to figure out what's going on. And a lot of times this happens. Men are typically more emotionally unavailable than women are. The problem is that women think that they're being emotionally available when really you're just as unavailable as the man is. You just present it in different ways. When we become defensive, when we blame shift, we even can name our emotions. But if we're blaming somebody else for those emotions, we are still not emotionally available. We have to be available to understand our own emotions. So we have to name them, and we have to be able to express those in a healthy way. So imagine sitting in a room with someone who's glued to their phone. They're there, but they're not with you. That's what it's like to be with somebody that is emotionally unavailable. But again, it goes more than just not being able to communicate or not being present in mind with you, as we're going to see here. So, what is emotional availability? If I had to actually define it, you guys know me well now. You know I like to define the term specifically. Emotional availability is the capacity to feel, express, and hold space for emotional experiences. I want to go over that one more time. Emotional availability is the capacity to feel, express, and hold space for emotional experiences, both your own and someone else's, without shutting down, avoiding, dismissing, or controlling. Okay? Without shutting down, avoiding, dismissing, or controlling. Defensiveness is a form of avoiding. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there are four key components that go into emotional availability. Okay? And those four things are self awareness, self regulation, empathy, and relational consistency. We'll talk about each one of those. So, self awareness, knowing what you feel and why, right? And this is where I say an emotionally unavailable person, when they show up and they are hurt by their partner, when they immediately are blaming their partner, that is not emotional availability. You may tell your partner, even, you may express, I'm upset with you right now. But if you don't know why you are hurting over their action, and you can't say, because I feel betrayed because of this, because of that, or even if, hey, I'm very hurt because I had a previous partner do this to me and it makes me feel like I'm going down that same path. If you can't express the why behind it, then you are not emotionally available. We have to have that awareness to know what we're feeling. We have to name that emotion, and we have to know why that emotion is present. Is it this person and something they specifically did? Does it go against one of my values? Does it go against one of my own needs? Does it go against a boundary? But if I can't say what it is and the why behind why I'm upset with them, I'm not emotionally available. So we have to have that self-awareness. Now, the next step is self-regulation, managing emotions without exploding or withdrawing. So somebody that I just can't deal with this and walk away. It's okay that you do need space, but saying I can't deal with this is not being emotionally available. You can still walk away from a conversation, but you can do it in a much different fashion when you are emotionally available. You'll say something like, I don't really have the words for this right now. I need some space to be able to think through what I'm feeling. That is emotionally available. Even though you're not expressing an actual emotion, you're coming at it with truth on what is actually going on inside your head. And it requires that vulnerability. To be able to be present means we're going to have to be vulnerable with that person, even when it's uncomfortable. So again, self-regulation is managing those emotions and without exploding, withdrawing, or shutting down kind of stuff. Now, empathy, that's the third one. Attuning to another person's emotions without defensiveness, okay? When somebody comes to you with an emotion and your first response is to tell them how you are feeling about what they just said to you, you are being emotionally unavailable. You're more worried about your own feelings than you are about them. You are showing a lack of empathy at all. I understand that whatever they did may have hurt you, by them saying what, they may be accusing you of something. And I get that hurts. But the emotionally available person will sit there and say, okay, I can at least see how I made you feel that way. And then we respond with something like a question like, are you willing to hear my side of it? Right? We don't, and that will be less defensive at that point because you're at least giving them your reasoning and your logic behind it. We're not being obtuse about it, and we're not putting all of the blame back on them. But we've got to have that empathy first. So an emotionally available person is always going to meet emotion with the appropriate emotion. So if somebody is mad at us about doing something, the appropriate emotion is not to get mad at them back. That is not, we don't mirror emotions. That's not a healthy thing to do in a lot of cases. So what we need to do is understand that what this person is looking for when they're mad at me is for me to be responsible for my actions, regardless if they meant them in a way that hurt them. That is emotionally available. That's understanding that they are hurt by my actions, regardless if I want them to make them feel that way. I have to meet that emotion with the appropriate emotion, which is sorrow, regret, remorse, because even though I didn't mean to hurt them, I still did. And I didn't think of that angle that they're now coming at me with. I have to give them at least some sort of regret, because we don't mean to hurt them. That's the emotionally available thing. But typically, most people these days are very, very defensive. They go straight to, oh, this is your fault. You're the problem. You're this, you're that. Defensiveness shows an immediate lack of empathy for the other person's side. And I get it that you want to defend your actions because you don't want to be labeled as this bad person, but they're not labeling you as a bad person by saying you hurt their feelings. Okay. And empathy states that we should go with the, giving them the apology first and then asking them, and that's respectful, to ask them if they have the space to hear your side of it, Typically, most people, when you come at an argument from that angle of, I'm so sorry I made you feel that way, I can completely understand. Are you willing to hear my side and what my thought process was? Because I totally didn't mean it that way. Most people are like, yeah, I understand. I'm probably being more, I'm probably overthinking this more than I should, but I'd love to hear your side of it. And we come to a new agreement out of that. But when we come at defensively, they're going to get defensive, I get defensive, and it's just like this one up defensive, defensive, defensive. Everybody keeps going up until nothing really gets solved. So we need to have that empathy. The last one is relational consistency. Showing up emotionally over time, not just in high stakes moments or when it benefits you. We have a real bad problem with people that will show up emotionally for you, right? And here's where it shows its head that somebody does not have relational consistency. Here's a very good example. So a lot of times what'll happen is somebody is there for their partner through everything that they go through when it's not conflict between the two of them. Meaning, so your partner, let's say your partner's having a bad day. They come home. You're like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Here, what can I do to make it better? Let me just sit and listen to you. We're very emotionally present. The minute that person comes to you and says you did something wrong, we shut down, we get defensive. That is not relational consistency. What that is avoiding. That's an avoidance right there of the blame of something. And we cannot call ourselves emotionally available if I cannot sit with the discomfort of being told that I'm doing something wrong in that criticism. And this is where we have a huge problem, is that people, they want to give you empathy when it benefits them or when it does not cause a discomfort emotion in them. But they won't show up for you when they're, put to blame, when they're triggered, when all these things happen. And that's why a lot of times when we come at criticism with somebody, they immediately start getting defensive. Now, I will say on the other side of it, if you're the one coming to your partner with problems, don't just assume that it's their emotional unavailability that's the problem. We have to set that conversation up properly. We have to ensure that we are coming at that conversation from a healthy place as well. And we can't come there immediately projecting and saying, you did this and you did this and you did this. If we come to that conversation as the person bringing up the hurt feelings, like, hey, look, I'm really hurt by what you did here. Here's what I would want you to do in the future. That's a healthy way to do it. If they still shut down through that, then yes, they are emotionally unavailable. But if we come into that conversation, we're like, you shouldn't have done this and you betrayed me, and we're on the defensive before they even have a chance to open up. And so we can't call them emotionally unavailable. If my first defense is to project, that means I am also not being relationally consistent with them. I have to sit with the discomfort of what they did to me, make the assumption that they didn't mean to do it, come at the conversation from a healthy direction. Okay, but that's where on both sides of it, relational consistency can really be the deciding factor of whether or not you are emotionally available for your partner. Okay, think of emotional availability like a thermometer. Okay, available people can sense the temperature of a moment. So if it's starting to get heated, they're going to sense it and they're going to know what emotion to put into it to bring it back down. If it's going too cold, they understand how to warm it back up. Right? So emotional availability is the ability to gauge the temperature and put on the right clothes, if you will, to know whether or not it's time to put on a jacket or take off clothes and show some more skin, if you will. Okay. Now, how do we spot emotionally unavailable people? Okay. The first, I'm going to give you some common red flags, essentially, right? And I want to make sure that you guys understand that just because somebody's emotionally unavailable does not mean they're not talkative. Sometimes they are the most charming people in a room. But what they're doing is it's a mask they're wearing so that they don't have to be vulnerable. So we have to look for vulnerability. Are they being vulnerable? Are they talking about, like, how do they deal with that vulnerability in a space, right? But does not mean that they just don't talk about emotions, because a lot of times they will talk about emotions. But again, when it has to do with something else, it's okay. But as soon as they're being triggered or whatnot, they become emotionally unavailable. That means that they are emotionally unavailable. They have to show up in the moments of discomfort the same way that they show up in moments of non-discomfort. Otherwise, they are not emotionally available. Okay. So see, these are some of the common red flags. First, they deflect serious conversation. Right? Let's say you bring up, hey, I'm feeling lonely, and they joke they change the subject, they put it on you, you're too sensitive, anything like that means that they're not willing to sit with the discomfort. They're not willing to have the empathy to see how you are feeling, right? Even if they don't feel lonely themselves, let's say you've barely gotten any time in the last week together and you bring up, I'm feeling lonely. And even if they're not feeling lonely, an emotionally available partner will see that you're bringing up an emotion that makes you feel a certain way. And they're going to meet that emotion with the appropriate emotion, meaning, I didn't mean to make you feel that way. There's sorrow, there's regret, there's remorse, there's something like that, because they didn't mean to make you feel that way. If they do anything other than that, then they are deflecting and they are literally basically putting it back on you. And I understand we are all responsible for our emotions, but we are not responsible for how someone treats us that triggers those emotions. They are still responsible for that action. And that's where everything in a relationship is twofold. We have to understand that you're going to step on people's toes, and you're going to have to understand that they are going to step on your toes. And we have to understand that we have to try to avoid that as much as possible. And a good conversation where we come up with, we don't deflect, we don't defer blame, we don't shift the blame. That's where the magic happens, where we get past these things because we understand the other person, because we come at it with empathy from both sides. Now, they intellectualize emotions, right? If we get too too intellectual with how we describe emotions, too logical. Like, they analyze feelings but won't express or sit with them. If they ever, and this is one that I used to hear a lot in my abusive relationship, I see why you'd feel like that, right? But it's not logical. There's no logic behind the way you're feeling. There doesn't need to be a logic behind it, right? We can tell them that, hey, I can see how you feel that way. I personally wouldn't feel that way in that situation, so it's very hard for me to understand, but I can see how you would feel that way, right? That's the way we're coming at it, because our logic states, I wouldn't feel that way in that scenario, so I don't necessarily understand it, but I can understand how you feel. It's basically saying, I see where you're at, and I see where I'm at, and although we are different, I can respect where you're at. Because again, if you've been around for a while, I've talked about respect and trust going hand in hand. By respecting their viewpoint, you are automatically saying, you can trust me, that it's okay. I understand your side. I don't necessarily feel the same way from my perspective, and that's okay, because I still love you. I still want to be around. So if we intellectualize too much, it ends up having a problem of basically placing the blame back on the person that's feeling for everything, for both their actions, how they're taking things, all of that stuff. Now, the next red flag is they shut down during conflict. Instead of engaging, they go quiet, ghost, or emotionally withdraw. Another one that they can do is sometimes they're going to divert the conversation. They'll literally have the shortest response possible and then immediately try to shift the topic somewhere else, right? I'm sorry I made you feel that way. So what are we doing on Tuesday? That it is a deflection, but it's a shutting down. They are shutting down on the actual emotional topic that needs to be exposed and talked about. They're shifting it somewhere else, okay? So look for people that shut down, or they walk away from the conversation the minute that they hear something that they don't like, right? The fourth red flag is they label emotional needs as drama. You expressing your needs tends to come out being, you're being needy, you're being sensitive, you're just overthinking it, right? And their withdrawal in their head, what they're thinking is they're protecting their peace, but what they're really doing is avoiding accountability, right? One of the things I say in dating is that if I ever, date, I'm going to have somebody that is able to take responsibility for their actions and not just say, I'm protecting my peace as a way of getting out of a relation or out of a conversation, because that gets nowhere. We have to come to some sort of closure, whether we agree to disagree or we agree on a solution. We have to come to some sort of resolve that we're on the understanding of respecting each other's side, no matter what it is. All right. So those four common red flags we see in somebody who's emotionally unavailable is they deflect serious conversations, they intellectualize emotions, they shut down during conflict, or they label emotional needs as drama, right? Some more real world examples, like a partner who only shows affection after you pull away, not consistently. Like, so let's say you guys are in a great relationship, things are going good, and you get your feelings hurt, right? And, you try to talk to them, they don't want to talk to you, they kind of dismiss you, and then you pull away, and immediately now they're going to start giving you affection and attention. Like all of a sudden, now they're going to be, that's a person that's emotionally unavailable. They're only available to you when their needs are not getting met, right? But we have to show up even when our needs are not getting met. Otherwise, it's not emotional availability, right? A friend who's there for fun times but disappears when you're struggling, right? Like as soon as you've got a barbecue going on at the house, they're the first person to show up. But as soon as you're struggling with something and you text them and you say, I need to talk. Do you have free time? Suddenly they're not there. Right? Those are people that are emotionally unavailable. And we have to understand this emotional availability doesn't just bridge into romantic relationships. This can also go into friendship relationships as well, family dynamics as well. It really doesn't mean it just being in a romantic relationship. Another real world example is a parent who lectures instead of listening when you express pain. When a child is in pain about something that's going on, they're going to well, this is what you need to do. And they're projecting. They are projecting. Instead of listening and saying, oh, man, I can totally see how you feel that way after this person did this at school. What do you think we should do about it? Right? We are immediately lecturing. We're not listening or feeling their emotion. There's a lack of empathy. Again, lack of empathy is one of the biggest ways to spot somebody that is not emotionally available. Somebody that even has a hard time sitting with their emotion but still can have empathy is more emotionally available than the person that hits all the other blocks but is like has no empathy. I wouldn't see it that way. I don't know why you're so hurt. Those kinds of people. Okay. So how do we recognize emotionally available people? Right. So now we know what it looks like when we say they're emotionally unavailable. What does it look like to find somebody that is emotionally available to us? Right? They don't just react. They're going to respond to things. They don't always have the perfect words, but they're going to hold, like, this is the biggest key right here. So I want you to listen up. They have the space for your truth, and they are not going to meet your truth with their own version of the truth, regardless of what you say. Right, and that is the biggest part. They hold space for your truth, even if they don't even if they don't agree. They're going to hold space for your truth, even if their truth is different. They're going to hold space for you, even if it means that it's something directed at you negatively that you've done. Right, so we have to see that emotionally available people are going to be able to hold space for you. Okay. Now, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but again, it also goes into how I show up, as an emotionally available person. It means that I'm always showing up with my truth, not necessarily, deflecting or deferring in any way, shape, or form. Now, green flags. They stay engaged during conflict. Even if it's uncomfortable, they're not going to flee. They're not going to blame. They don't stonewall. They're typically going to ask questions. A green flag person typically gets curious during conflict, not defensive. So in most cases, if we got a fight going on and someone's like, you did this and I feel betrayed, a defensive person is going to tell them, you shouldn't feel that way. I didn't mean it like that. The emotionally available person is going to sit there and be like, I know I made you feel that way, but that's not necessarily how I intended it, and I'm sorry that it came out that way. They're sitting with the uncomfortable. They're sitting with being blamed for something, right? And they're not going to turn around and blame you and tell you you're crazy over it in any way, shape, or form. They're going to accept responsibility, but they're also going to be able to stand in their truth and say, that's not how I meant it, and I'm sorry that it came off that way. How can we make this better in the future? Or they're going to ask questions like, why is it that you feel betrayed by that action? It's not that I don't agree with you or disagree. I want to know more as to why you feel betrayed by that, because in the past, I've never had somebody tell me they felt betrayed by that same action. So please help me understand you. That's an emotionally available person because they're holding space for your explanation and expression of that emotion. They're holding space for it by asking questions. So when they stay engaged, look for people that ask questions like, can you tell me more about that? Can you help me understand more about that? Can you explain a little bit more of why you feel that way? Those kinds of questions are telling you that that person is emotionally available for you. And again, if we look for this in times of conflict when they have hurt our feelings and I'm expressing that to them, how they show up in that moment is the biggest key as to whether or not they are emotionally available for you. Because once it's them that's getting blamed for things, then the real person kind of comes out. So look for these green flags in that type of conflict, right? The next green flag is they express their own emotional states. I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, but I want to talk, right? Even if we're not talking about just in conflict, and this person is just having a bad day, and you're like, "Is everything okay?" You're not talking much, and the emotionally unavailable person will say, "No, everything's fine." That's an emotionally unavailable person. But emotionally available person will be like, "I'm feeling very overwhelmed. I want to talk, but just now is not the right time. Can we pause this till later?" Standing in my truth, I'm not ready to talk about it, but I'm telling you what emotion I'm at least feeling overwhelmed right now. I cannot have the conversation. So I'm kind of giving you the why is I can't have the conversation to make sure that you understand that it's not you that's the problem. It's whatever I'm dealing with internally with all the different things I have going on in my life, because we have to understand that the other person sitting across from us in a relationship, friendship, whatever, has 1,000 things going on in their life that we don't even know about. Just like we have 1,000 things going on in our life that they don't know about. It goes both directions, right? So when they're able to express those emotions, even when it's an uncomfortable emotion, that's a healthy thing. Okay. The next green flag is they validate rather than fix. If I had $1 for every time somebody's hurt me and I've told them, "Hey, that really hurt that you did that." If I had $1 for every time somebody got defensive to that, I would be rich. And those are all coming from emotionally unavailable people. The best thing that somebody can do on the other side when they say, "Man, you hurt my feelings," the emotionally available person is going to show up by saying things like, "That sounds really painful from your perspective, and I'm sorry I made you feel that way." Or I didn't intend it that way, but I can see how you feel that way, and that sounds painful. We are not trying to fix the problem, right? A fixer is going to be like, "You need to start looking at it from a different angle. You need to change your perspective. You need to change this. You're being too sensitive." That's the fixer coming out. But validating that emotion is a healthy thing. But validation, we have to understand too. I've heard a lot of people are like, "It's not reasonable to validate emotions." And I hear that from a lot of people that don't understand psychologically what's going on and don't understand what the word validate really means. Validate does not mean that I am agreeing with that emotion. That's not telling you that that emotion is rational or anything. It's saying, "I can see your pain." That's it. I can validate by saying, "I can see how you might take it that way," essentially. I can see how painful that could be. We are not telling them that they are healthy and they're just and they're right for having that feeling. We're just telling them, "I validate that I can see that emotion." That's it. We can get into a conversation where we now help them to understand where they're being a little bit irrational with their emotions, but I can't do that if I don't first validate. And I've heard tons of these like so-called coaches out there say, "Oh, it's not reasonable. You should not validate your partner's emotions." That's typically coming from a person that's never had any validation from anyone else and thinks that they can do everything on their own. But in all honesty, in a close-knit relationship, you have to have validation. Again, validation does not equate to agreeing to that emotion. Meaning, I'm not saying you have all the logic in the world. I'm saying I can see how it would feel that way. Now, let's have a conversation to try to understand perspective so you can see how maybe your thinking process is drawing in on this thing that you think is happening that's not actually happening. And then by doing so, maybe you won't hurt as much. That is validating, but also saying, "Let's sit in this space together." Okay. So if they validate rather than fix, it's a healthy thing. Okay. Again, we will look for somebody saying, "That sounds painful. Thank you for sharing." That's somebody that is validating the pain. They're telling you, "I see how painful that is. I can see how you'd feel that way." Okay. Now, another green flag is they repair after a rupture, right? So let's say they did get defensive, right? Because we're not all going to be perfect. Okay. We all try to show up emotionally available for our partners all the time, but depending on what I've got going in my life, I may be boiling over. A good example is in my last relationship. I was having a really bad day from a lot of things that were going on within my business, within my VA healthcare stuff, and just some other things, going on with my son and schooling and all sorts of stuff, right? And my partner came to me and didn't really preface anything other than saying, I got some news from my doctor and whatever. And she put a whole bunch of stuff on me, blaming me and saying she wasn't blaming me, but blaming me for what was going on. And I couldn't take it anymore. And I got really defensive and I walked away from that conversation. I said, I can't take this right now. Today is just not the day for this. But the next day I went to repair after that rupture because I realized, hey, I'm being a little defensive and I know why, right? So I came to it the next day, said, look, I was being defensive. Okay. I know why I was being defensive because I just had a lot on my plate and you didn't deserve for me to get defensive with you. Okay. I understand where I went wrong. I do have space now. Can we re-engage in this conversation? I want to understand where you're coming from and I apologize for what I did. Somebody that can repair after a rupture is typically more of a emotionally available because even if in the moment they weren't available, whatever it was, they were triggered. They have the foresight to, or the hindsight to say afterwards, hey, I created a problem here and I'm the one that was emotionally unavailable. We can't show up emotionally available in every situation and be perfect. And I think a lot of people, they look at me and are like, oh man, you must have great relationships. I have problems too. In every relationship I've been in, I've had some of these similar problems. It doesn't mean that that I don't work on this stuff. And it does, I can't be perfect, but what it does mean is that I do take accountability. And I think the biggest thing with all of this is people taking emotional accountability for how they affect others is the biggest green flag you can see in all of this. It's not so much that they hurt your feelings. It's not so much they get defensive. It's how they react 12 hours after when the dopamine wears off, when the adrenaline wears off from the fights you've been in. Do they take accountability or do they stonewall more? If a person doesn't take accountability the next day and they try to stonewall or act like it doesn't happen, that person is a really emotionally unavailable person. But if they take accountability, they say, hey, look, I screwed up. I did this. That's somebody that is taking, they're literally saying I am at fault for the way that conversation went. And that should be a green flag to people. Because we can't process emotions always in real time and really understand what we're doing and be able to communicate it. So how they repair after the rupture is a huge way of seeing whether or not somebody is in a healthy headspace, right? So some other real world examples of these green flags, right? A friend who circles back after a tense moment. I thought about what you said and I want to do better. Right? Like even if you guys left the conversation like, well, I just don't, let's say it wasn't like a blow up, but it was like a tense fight and like, well, I'm just not going to do that. That's just not in me to do it. But when they circle back later, that means that they've thought about it and you're important enough to them that they wanted to explore their own emotions and they had the after conversation process. They come back to it and they say, I thought about what you said and I want to do better, so help me understand. When they circle back to the same conversation to try to be on a more understanding plane, that means they do have the empathy. Sometimes the empathy doesn't come out in the conversation itself because we do get defensive, but they're saying, I want to repair this and I want to be good. Right? Some other real world examples, a partner who can say, I'm scared too, but I want to face it together. Right. And this comes out a lot of times when somebody's like, I'm scared of losing you and this happened and I felt like I'm already losing you. And that partner that meets that emotion, again, meeting that emotion, I'm scared too. Let's talk about this. Let's get through this together. That's an emotionally available person. Okay. So the next part of this is, why do we settle for unavailable people? Because it's a common trend that I'm finding more and more in clients as they keep going back to emotionally unavailable people repeatedly over and over and over again. And it's like they feel like they're dating the same person that is emotionally unavailable over and over again. Why is that? Well, a lot of times we often unconsciously seek patterns in people that are comfortable to us, that are familiar, not necessarily what's healthy. Because sometimes healthy can actually feel boring to a lot of people, right? Or, healthy does not feel like a strong emotional and intense connection. And a lot of times we go for emotionally unavailable people because we are unavailable ourselves, right? So the fact that they don't show up with emotions and they're not vulnerable means that I'm probably not going to need to be vulnerable either. But we will have a completely superficial relationship at that point. It's going to require in a relationship for two people to be vulnerable for pain to be there. There's no other way around it. You're going to step on each other's toes. You're going to end up having to blame the other person. You're going to have to tell them where they are hurting you. But how we actually tell that person they're hurting and how we meet the hurt that we've caused is everything when it comes to emotional availability. So, again, to just kind of package that up, how we show up for somebody when they're blaming us for their hurt, and how other people, like how they take our hurt, how I express my hurt, that's all emotional availability. If I can do it without projecting or being defensive or dismissing or shutting down, I'm going to be an emotionally available person. But if I'm not emotionally available, I typically am going to be going after someone that is emotionally unavailable person as well. Right. So if we're looking for things that feel familiar, right? If love meant inconsistency, we chase closeness like a reward, right? So a lot of times, if it's a reward based system, if our brain has now seen love as inconsistent and it's a reward, we will overextend into that relationship trying to get them to open up when they are not willing to open up. We see it as a challenge a lot of times when they're not emotionally available, that we need to pursue them more to get them to open up. But that never works. If they are emotionally unavailable, we chasing them typically is going to make them withdraw more. Okay, because it's just the way it goes. They feel pressured at that point. Okay, if vulnerability was punished ever in life, like you're told, like shut up, quit crying, kind of stuff, right? If vulnerability was punished, we fear emotional depth, even while craving it at the same time. So a lot of times, again, we will stay with a partner that's emotionally unavailable because it's not requiring us to be vulnerable with them. It's not requiring us to open up about our emotions or express those. So we'll end up in this like situationship where we're basically just friends that, are living together or sleeping together or whatever it is, that they're not emotionally available because I'm not emotionally available either. So we have to increase our own emotional availability if we want to find a partner that is also emotionally unavailable. So I have to remember that just because they're not they're emotionally unavailable does not mean that I'm emotionally available. I may not be, and that's why I keep attracting people like that. Okay. Another one why we settle is if caretaking was our survival role, we're drawn to people that need to get fixed. So again, it's another challenge, right? So if we feel like we are always responsible for somebody else's emotions, if somebody's being emotionally unavailable, we see it as a challenge to comfort them more, give them more safe space till they open up. And that's not a good thing. We should be walking away from people that show that they are consistently not emotionally available. Again, we can have moments where we're not emotionally available, we get defensive, we shut down. If the pattern states that every time there's an emotional conversation, they shut down or they get defensive, that is showing you that they are emotionally unavailable. And we need to walk away, because what will end up happening is we're going to start to resent them. Then things come out that typically aren't part of our persona. We might get mad, we might get angry, we might lash out. And then they're going to blame us for it when it was really their emotional unavailability that is now causing that resentment, which is coming out as anger. Okay, so we have to have the courage to walk away from these things. When we see somebody that is consistently emotionally not available to us, we have to say, this relationship isn't for me. Either you learn how to become emotionally available for me, or I'm going to walk out of this relationship. And if you don't know what emotional availability is, let's work on that together. Let's figure out the answer. Let's go to therapy. Let's go to a coach. Let's read some books. Let's do whatever we have to do so that we both can be emotionally available. But we do not stay in that position with the relationship the way it is. We have to walk away. Right? Now, how do we become more emotionally available ourselves, right? Well, the very first thing I have ever told any client that feels like they are not good at communicating emotions, because again, we have to communicate what we're feeling. It's part of the deal. We need to expand our emotional vocabulary, right? Instead of using the typical, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm tired, the typical emotions we hear, we need to understand the 6 core emotions and then all of the subset emotions that go along with it. It's not enough to say I'm angry, right? Because there's a difference between anger that's coming from a place of hate and anger that's coming from a place of frustration. So I have to understand my emotions to be able to communicate them. I can't just say I know what I'm feeling, right? I have to tell you what it is I'm feeling, because if I can't even name the emotion, I can't even tell you where it's coming from. I can't even tell you why it's there in the first place. So I need to expand that emotional vocabulary past the whole bad, fine, stressed, tired, good, those kinds of things, right? Instead of saying I'm fine, saying I feel overlooked and it's making me tense, right? Instead of saying I'm fine, I'm overwhelmed right now with the amount of stress on top of me, right? And I don't know how to express it yet, or I don't know what to do yet, right? But that right there is standing in your truth. That right there is saying I'm fine is not standing in truth. And if you don't want to give the person the answer when somebody asks how you doing, you say I'm doing okay, but it's not something I want to discuss with you. Instead of just saying okay and then them having a bad response and then you being mad at them for having a bad response or not being indifferent or whatever the case may be, or hiding behind a mask, we don't have to hide behind masks. We can show up to that same conversation emotionally available with our truth. I'm not doing okay, but I'm not willing to discuss it with you. Thank you for asking, and thank you for showing that you might care, but it's just not something I'm willing to discuss with you. That's it. That's us showing up emotionally available in a situation instead of shirking down and putting a mask on because we just don't want to deal with people. The more we get better at that, the more we're going to be respected. The more we're respected, the more we're going to draw people that really do care to us. Okay. So increasing that emotional vocabulary, right? The next thing I say when it comes to increasing our own emotional availability is increasing your tolerance for emotional discomfort. Emotions aren't problems to fix, they're experiences to feel and understand, right? So the practice here is like sitting with that uncomfortable, no matter what it is, right? Sitting it with for 90 seconds without distracting, without grabbing a phone, without grabbing this, without grabbing that. Say to yourself, why do I feel this way? Right. And if you don't know where to start with this stuff, this is where I tell people go get a coach, get a therapist, get somebody that can help you. Because I have dozens, well, probably more than dozens. I probably have hundreds of journal prompts for you. Tell me what you're feeling, and I'll give you the journal prompt to think about for that 90 seconds. Right. So, you're in an uncomfortable emotion. You're not understanding why. But it's directly like it feels a bit like betrayal, right? You're like, I don't know why I feel betrayed. I have prompts like, who does this most look like in your past, right? Where has this feeling come up before previously in your life? What other relationships are mimicking this one that you have right now? And those sitting with that discomfort, understanding the why, the light bulb will go off in your brain and you'll start to figure out, you'll connect the dots as to why you are feeling that way. And you'll actually be more excited to express this to somebody and say, I know why I'm feeling betrayed by that. And this is why. And the discomfort in that moment, the conflict is actually a way of bringing two people closer together. We think conflict is going to split us apart, and a lot of people won't have conflict because they're fearing of rejection or abandonment, when in actuality, conflict is the only way to actually build trust. I have to have conflict to see if somebody respects my side, to know that we are respected in the hardest moments of a relationship. To see that respect means that now I can trust that person. But if I never test it with conflict, I don't know if they truly respect me or if they're just getting lucky in life. I have to give them things that actually test their respect for me to see if I can trust them. So having those emotional conversations when it's uncomfortable is going to breed healthy relationships. It's healthy conflict at that point, and we have to have it in order to draw close with somebody. So again, when it comes to that tolerance to those emotions, we need to sit with it for 90 seconds if we can, and then say aloud, right? Things like, this feeling is not an emergency. This is not killing me. This is information telling me something about myself that I need to figure out. When we run from that, that makes us emotionally unavailable because we never understand ourselves. But then we want to be in a relationship, and the whole concept of relationship is I have to communicate myself to somebody else. So if you don't understand yourself because you're not willing to sit with the discomfort, you're not emotionally available enough to communicate who you are to somebody else. You don't understand yourself, you can't communicate that to somebody else. I say it 1,000 times. Women come to me and I'm like, okay, so what's your ideal man look like? Well, I don't know. I'll know it when I see it. And I always tell them that's dangerous because that's when you settle for whatever is good in the moment. You're not settling for a person that's actually designed for you, right? And but a lot of times it comes because they can't actually communicate what they want. They don't really know. They think they do, but they have no words for it. Well, how do I communicate that to somebody else? Like when you go to the car lot, I use this analogy 1,000 times. I beat it to a pulp with this one, but you go to a used car lot and you don't know what kind of car you want. You don't know what options you want. You don't know what color you want. You don't know anything, right? You don't know what your price breakdown is. You end up in a car that's not for you because they're going to sell you on the first shiny color, red colored car that they've got on the lot that looks flashy to you. You get in that car, and 2, 3 weeks later, you're like, man, I really wish this had a sunroof. Man, I really wish this had leather seats. Man, I really wish the trunk was bigger. Man, I really wish it had lane assist. Man, I really well, we didn't talk about that before we even went to the dealership. We didn't even know what we were looking for. We did no research, no understanding of what it is I want. And then we're trying to express that to a guy at the dealership. That's not going to work. The same thing when it comes to relationships. I have to understand myself first. So I have to understand what the discomfort feeling feels like and why it's there, so I can now communicate that to somebody else, while also telling myself this is information about myself. This is not pain. This is not somebody, stabbing a knife in me. It's not an emergency. It's okay. I'm going to live through it. Let's figure out why it's there so I can communicate that to my partner. All right. So that's how we do it. We increase our tolerance for emotional discomfort. And again, remembering emotions aren't problems to fix, they're experiences to feel. The next thing we do is share emotions in real time using micro expressions. We're not going to be, having the big conversations about our emotions, like, well, we're crying or something like that. But we're trying to drop these small truths, these small emotional truths with people, that instead of dumping everything, just small little things. The phrase we talked about earlier, like, I'm feeling very overwhelmed and I'm not really sure what to say about it. That right there is a small truth. We may know what we're feeling, but we just don't want to say it. But most often, like, we can at least mask it with a truth that we are feeling overwhelmed and I just don't know what to say about it yet, or I just don't want to open up to you just yet about it. That's a small truth, right? We can also, like, when somebody comments something, instead of getting into the big conversation with them, we can say things like, that comment kind of stung. I need to sit with that for a minute. That comment hurt a little more than I expected it to. Give me a few to think about that instead of reacting to it. Because again, emotional reactivity states that is an emotionally unavailable person. They have to respond to that emotion, and that's a way of responding. It's a truth. Because the truth is that if you responded, like reacted, and you got mad at the person or like lashed out at them, that is not a true emotional response, or a true response. That is the emotional response. That's not a marriage of both emotion and logic. Was what we should be looking for, is a way of saying what's truthful to us. That comment stung. We don't have to get mad at them. It may make us mad, but we don't have to get mad at them. We can just kind of own that truth of what we're feeling in the moment. That's it. Real time emotion, not the aftermath of what they did to us and whatnot. We're just going with what we're feeling right now. That comment stung, right? We can even say, like, when they bring up a topic that's hard for us to talk about, we just say, this topic is really hard for me to talk about. Can we pause? Or can we stay present in this moment and talk about that stuff later? Things like that, where I'm owning it in a small truth. I'm not giving all the reasons why it hurt me, why it's causing the discomfort, but I'm allowing myself to, in real time, share my emotions with this person. Okay. Why does this one work? Well, tiny truth telling builds emotional trust inside you and with others, because they're seeing you being honest about stuff. What's interesting is that so many people are afraid to be a little emotionally available with people and emotionally vulnerable with people. But the people that I've had, as far as clients that have done the work that I ask them to do, so the homework, a lot of times, I'll ask them to just share a truth like that. So typically, like with a client that will say, I'm fine all the time, I'll say, from now on, you can say, I'm not fine. And then you're going to tell them, but I don't want to talk to you about it. What's awesome is that over time gets that person that's on the other side to do one of two things. Either they stop asking and bothering you, which gives that they're not really caring, they're just doing it for small talk, kind of keeps them at bay. But those people that truly do care, they're going to circle back around to it. And you'll find out who really cares about you, but you feel better in sharing it in that manner than just sharing, I'm fine. We don't resent the person for asking anymore because I shared my truth. When we hide our truth and not be vulnerable, that's where resentment, really, that's where it starts in a lot of friendships and relationships. We start resenting people for asking us and not being able to show up and say how we really feel. That doesn't mean we have to show that person how we really feel, but sharing the truth of, I'm not willing to talk to you about it, says, now you need to respect this micro boundary that I put that says, I'm not talking to you about topics that are bothering me right now, right? So that right there is the reason why those micro truths work. because it's building trust in myself that I'm being honest with other people. And it also means that they're going to see me as someone to be respected because I'm at least giving them the honest take on it and I'm not bullshitting my way through it. Right? If we all started doing this more often, I'm fine not saying that when you're not fine. If we can get rid of that as a culture and actually have vulnerable, honest conversations that I'm not doing fine, but it's going to be okay. I have somebody to talk to. Anything other than what you are masking yourself with, that would help society 1,000 times over. Right? Now, the next way that we increase our emotional availability is we repair when you miss the moment, right? You won't always respond well. Come on, we're human beings. We are emotions run high. We get triggered when we don't expect it. Our heart rate goes up. We don't know how to control it. Things happen, okay? We're not always going to show up perfect. Now, if you're showing up decently every single time, but you have that one blowout, then learning how to come back to it and repair is huge, right? We return to the conversation and we say things like, I realized I shut down. I realized I got defensive. I know that I stonewalled right afterwards. I know that I didn't have much empathy for your side of it. I know I wasn't being very understanding. I know I was deflecting. I know I was shifting blame. Tell them what you know you did, right? That's the first thing because that shows awareness for who we are. Like we talked about, the 4 parts of emotional availability means I need to be aware, I need to regulate, I need to have empathy, and I need to have consistency. So by coming back to it says, I'm aware enough that I know, even without you telling me, I know I dismissed you. I know I shut down on you. I know I got defensive. I know I yelled at you. Whatever it is, we're showing we have the awareness to say, I know I did that bad, right? I wasn't trying to dismiss you. I wasn't trying to deflect from you, but it happened and I'm sorry for that. Right. And then we want to ask questions. When we damage something, don't tell them they are required to forgive you. Don't just say an apology and then leave it at that and be like, why aren't you forgiving me? We need to ask to revisit the conversation. We need to ask, is there anything we can do to repair it? We need to ask, how can I reconcile with you? We need to ask for forgiveness. That shows that you respect them, because if we don't and we try to force that forgiveness on somebody, say you need to forgive me because I apologized, or we're forcing the apology, we're making that apology more about us than about them. An apology should be about the other person and what we did to their feelings and not about me and my guilt. When we apologize out of a place of guilt, it does nothing whatsoever. When we apologize with actual remorse, like general remorse for what we did to that person, it's going to repair that much, much quicker. But I've got to ask for that forgiveness. They are not required to forgive me. They will be in God's kingdom, but they aren't required to forgive me in the exact moment. They may have to process through everything that's happened to be able to let go of it, depending how deep it was. But how we show up and we have damaged something, how we ask for that repair to be done, and we say, look, this is the behavior I did. I know it was wrong. What can I do to revisit this conversation now that I've had some time to reflect? How can we repair this? Whatever the case may be, asking those questions. So naming the behavior you did wrong, apologizing for it, and asking for forgiveness and reconciling and going into the conversation. That's where the magic happens. That shows a lot of emotional maturity and a lot of humility to say, I'm willing to be vulnerable enough to admit that I made a mistake. People that can admit mistakes have a much higher respect in my book than somebody that tries to always say, well, it's somebody else's fault for everything. I used to have a foreman that I worked with, and he used to blame everyone for everything, to the point where one of our contractors was like, you know, George, if it was you in a telephone pole on this job site, you'd blame the telephone pole for the problems. And it just goes to show you that person cannot take accountability for anything they have. I don't respect a person like that. I can only respect somebody that says, you know, I screwed that up. I have much more respect for that person. So when we go to repair and we're vulnerable and we say we made a mistake, we're going to gain more respect with that person, and we can actually gain more trust out of it, because as respect goes up, so does trust. So they kind of move hand in hand. The more you respect someone, the more you trust them, so on and so forth. Right? The last thing when it comes to building our own emotional availability is building emotional rituals into relationships, right? Don't wait until it's urgent to be able to connect with somebody, right? For some examples of this are doing weekly check-ins, right? Like every Sunday we check in. I have tools that I use specifically for this for couples. of this is how we're going to check in. We're going to do this. We're going to go through these things very, very specifically because it's a very good way for you guys to connect even when there wasn't a problem, or maybe, we just didn't have the space or time to be able to communicate a problem. That Sunday check-in is like, okay, well, what issues did you have with my behavior this week? Right? It also means that when you come into that knowing that there's going to be that kind of stuff, you're already kind of braced for it. And you're already ready to be told that you did something wrong potentially during that week. So it's a little bit, the defensiveness is usually a lot more minimal when we're coming into a check-in like this, right? Right? We can even say like, but we don't want to always hit the bad stuff. We want to hit the good stuff too. So during that check-in, we can say things like, what's one thing that you want me to sustain from this week going forward? What things do you need me to do that I already did this week? What do you need more of what I did this week? Right? And this is where it's great time for like a partner. It's like, look, you were very, very good with your words of affirmation this week. And it blew me away. That's the most I've ever gotten from you. And I felt like I was on cloud 9 all week. Great. From now on, I'm going to do more of that because it did work. Right? But a lot of people don't want to communicate that stuff. But doing that emotional check-in every single week is extremely beneficial to making sure that relationship stays on a good path. Just because we're on a good path does not mean it's going to stay there. And if we do weekly check-ins, sometimes too, we judge in the moment and say, oh, well, this is not a good time to have this conversation. I'll wait till our Sunday check-in to have this conversation. Because if I start to give him my emotions right now, he's got this big meeting tomorrow at work. I don't want to get him off his game for that meeting. So it makes more sense, this is emotional intelligence talking, to wait till Sunday to have this conversation because it's not going to kill me to hold this in till Sunday. Then we'll have our emotional check-in. I'll be able to talk about it and we'll be good, right? We can sometimes even use a shared journal, right? Or voice notes behind each other, back and forth to each other. Using a shared journal is a way of saying like, okay, well, I want you to write first today and I'll write first tomorrow. We read what the other person wrote and then we write like a response to it, but we're doing it in a more intentional way. I know we can text each other. I get it. But a journal makes it more intentional, especially if it's like, this is the space right here. We get to talk about the very, very good and the very, very bad and express those emotions that may be hard for us to express. Because a lot of times once we see it written like that and we come from a non-projecting way, because when we text someone, we know that there's a response coming immediately. We want a response immediately. So we typically are more projecting. When we're writing it down, knowing that person is going to read it later, a lot of times what happens is our response softens a little bit. We soften our response, and then that person softens theirs, and we can actually get past struggles a little bit easier that way, right? And then we can also do like a weekly walk and talk. Like we go for a walk around the neighborhood, and we have a talk during that walk. There's something about that movement along with it that regulates the nervous system, that allows us to respond and not react to things. So those are some great things that we can do in a relationship. We can, do the emotional check-ins every single week. We can do a shared journal. We can do voice notes back and forth to each other. We can do the walk and talks. Those things all help us to build emotional availability with somebody. It's saying, I'm going to be intentional about showing up for you emotionally. Like sometimes we can't show up for each other because there's too much going on. But when we have those time to say, look, I may not be emotionally available because I got this and this going on at work, but let's set aside time tonight to make sure we walk and talk so that if there is any issues, we can bring them up at that time. But that's pretty much all I got for you guys tonight on emotional availability. Hopefully this was eye-opening. I know I saw some of the comments, showing it really was hammering home with some of you guys. But let's work on trying to be more emotionally available ourselves, less defensive, less reactive, less dismissive of our partners, and really work on being able to name what we're feeling and why when we communicate with each other. That goes a long way. This will be available again tomorrow on YouTube, and then it will get deleted shortly thereafter because Facebook is deleting things as soon as they're done. Or as soon as it hits like a month, I think it deletes it off there. But I leave it up until that month mark. So if you want to watch it on Facebook, that's fine. But I cannot post them anymore to Instagram. So if you want it and you're only on my Instagram, either you have to go to my Facebook or you have to wait till tomorrow sometime when I post to the YouTube channel. But other than that, that's all I got for you guys tonight. Hope everybody has a great finish to your weekend. And as always, stay safe, keep the faith, and never let them grind you down. Thanks, guys.